Today, an interview that summarizes so much of what's wrong with the media. When a listener asked me to fact-check this interview, at first I thought, oh no, not her again. Not the listener. The listener's awesome. But this royal figure who was, quote-unquote, interviewed. The media has a long history of rolling out the red carpet for her and other people and just letting them lie all they want. Then I went and watched this interview, and I saw how incredibly important it is to fact-check it for you. It's so instructive. It speaks to how you are disdained, mistreated by the media. I mentioned in the last episode that there's this double whammy. When the media lets someone lie with impunity, you're not only receiving lies, you're also having your time taken from you, your mental energy, your thought processes. In your precious time, you could be learning things that could help you understand the world around you. This interview with a queen is so packed with falsehoods and failure and the missed opportunity to tell you such important things that I discovered I actually need to make this a two-parter. So, today, part 1, all the Queen's lies, here on They Stand Corrected. Hi and welcome. I'm Josh Lebs. This is They Stand Corrected. For those of you who are just joining us, maybe you read about the show in Newsweek or heard about it from someone, I want to welcome you. I also encourage you to listen to the episodes I've done so far in order because they build on top of each other, and all of them will help you understand this episode. I am so grateful to so many of you who are spreading the word about this show. You know, we live in the attention economy. Everyone's clamoring for your attention. Breaking through all that noise to get you facts is an effort, and it takes all of you to help spread the word. So everyone who is doing anything you can to support this show, I thank you so much. The best way to support is to look at the show notes. You'll see a link to the newsletter. You can become a paid subscriber there. A bunch of you are doing that. And I've been hearing from some of you with questions, things that you want me to fact check. And that brings us to today's topic. I got this request from a listener.
Hi, Josh. My name is Barbara, and I am based in Chicago. I absolutely love your podcast. Anyway, I was listening to Joy Reid on MSNBC give an interview with Queen Rania of Jordan. I found there to be a tremendous amount of inaccuracies, and I was hoping you might look at the interview and set the record straight, not only for her audience, but for Joy herself.
Okay, so when I got that question, I thought of this old movie, The Shawshank Redemption, where this guy who's unfairly in jail chisels away a tiny bit at a time to tunnel his way through to the light. It's like there's such a massive, thick wall of lies to break through. I looked at what I can deliver for you. Now, at first, I thought about playing you sections of the interview and bleeping every time she said something that was false or had no legitimate basis. But I don't want to do that to your eardrums. All right, I got you. Here's what I can do that's most helpful. I am going to share with you some new things that we've not talked about yet on this show. Some of the most extreme, blatant lies that are also so educational to examine because of what they say about systemic problems in the media today. So I'm going to take you through those. But first, the giant elephant in the room. Joy Reid on MSNBC has spent recent years slamming the whole concept of monarchy and pointing out how awful it is and how dangerous it is.
Of course, it's hardly news that Trump has always had designs on reigning as a monarch with unlimited power rather than serving as a mere president in a democracy. Who's basically running as a monarch. I mean, they used the White House. They used Fort McHenry. They put the family there, and then they threw a Trump sign up over it, and as if they were already royals, as if they're already the king, the royal family of the United States. Autocracy is appealing to a certain kind of person who wants order and who sees a royal family. I mean, there's been polling showing that certain Republicans are fine with diminishing democracy if they stay in power.
And here's how this interview starts.
Joining me now is Her Majesty Queen Rania of Jordan. Your Majesty, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Joy. It's a pleasure to be here.
And this isn't like England, by the way, where there's a ceremonial royal family. Anyway, it's not about the title. This is what the Queen expects to be called, It's about the hypocrisy. This extended interview is 24 minutes, and it's entirely a screed against Israel, which happens to be the only democracy in the Middle East. The Democracy Index ranks governments each year. The U.S. and Israel are right next to each other. They're listed as flawed democracies, which is, of course, the only kind that exists in the real world. There are no flawless democracies. The index ranks 167 countries. Guess where Jordan is? Tied for 122, listed as authoritarian. Not a word about this in Joy's interview. Also, not a word about the financial assistance that Jordan receives from the United States, including military assistance, because Jordan is a strategic ally of the United States, and in many ways of Israel, for that matter. Jordan recently shot down Iranian missiles over its airspace. You know what else Joy didn't bring up? U.S. soldiers killed and wounded this year in Jordan.
We're learning more about the 3 U.S. soldiers killed during a drone attack in Jordan Sunday. They've been identified as Specialist Breonna Moffett, Specialist Kennedy Sanders, and Sergeant William Jerome Rivers. All 3 are from Georgia, and at least 34 other people were injured in the attack.
That's from news station WHAS. The U.S. is confident that Iran was behind this. Iran, the nation also using its proxies Hamas and Hezbollah to attack Israel. Yet in this interview, Queen Rania echoes Hamas propaganda about its ongoing war with Israel, like this.
Children have not been killed at this rate in any other time in history.
What? How does anyone say that with a straight face? And any true journalist who cares about journalism would jump right on that. I explained a lot of this in the death tolls episode. Here's a quick summary. The only figures we have for death tolls in Gaza come from Hamas. Hamas uses terms like Gaza Health Ministry, which, for the record, is an ironic name. I think this counts as irony. Yeah, Hamas openly says that it worships death. Hamas leaders say this: we worship death the way you worship life. The only figures we have come from Hamas, which lies about everything. And Hamas puts out figures that don't make sense anyway. One example is from this group, Honest Reporting. They do a good job of tracking this stuff. They found that one day Hamas said that the death toll had just jumped 300 overnight, and the death toll of children had jumped close to 700 overnight. You heard me right. And that's not the only time they've done that. So these numbers are all over the place and nonsensical. But it gets worse than that, because the media is serving as a propaganda force for Hamas. Hamas has tons of teenage terrorists and a history of including people who are over age 18 as children. Think about what this means for you, because all these problems are coming here to America. What you see happening with the media coverage of Israel, it's all on its way elsewhere as well. Here's an example. Imagine that you and a couple friends are off somewhere, and you are with a bunch of kids. Maybe you have kids. Maybe they have kids. Along come 3 terrorists who pull out knives or start setting up a bomb. And there is a police officer nearby who tries to stop them, and they're not going to stop. And the police officer manages to shoot them before they kill you and all the kids. In the media's telling, that police officer is now a child killer. Yep, the police officer is the child killer. And why? Because those terrorists I just mentioned haven't hit their 18th birthday yet. Now, maybe they actually have, because this is Hamas and who knows. But in this analogy, it happens here in America. Suddenly, the officer is the child killer because they're under 18. Think about the horrific school shootings we have in this country. Think about how important it would be for an officer to stop a shooter, even if that shooter's a teenager, before that shooter can go kill a bunch of kids or anyone. In the numbers put out by Hamas, the officer who kills that would-be mass shooter is a child killer if the shooter is under 18. This isn't an accusation or a theory. This is just a straight-up fact about numbers. But here's what the media does. They take images of actual children who are dying, suffering in war, which happens in every war. There's more than 100 armed conflicts going on right now. The media takes images only from Gaza. You don't see images of kids suffering in other wars. You have to go searching for them, and you probably can't find them in news. So the media takes these images of actual children and, while showing them, puts captions if it's in print or online, or big words on the chyron if it's on TV, or just uses words on radio, whatever, while giving you imagery and images of actual children. They say X number of thousand kids have been killed. So they're making you think that all those thousands must be like those little kids. And they're not telling you the truth about any of these being combatants, terrorists. So we don't know the numbers, and we do know that terrorists are included among the numbers of alleged children. Meanwhile, I mentioned Ethiopia in a previous episode, where an estimated 600,000 people have died due to conflict across just 2 years this decade. Tons of them are children. I've also told you that in Syria, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, including in 1 year, more than 100,000, many of them children. And by the way, she said ever, so it would be remiss of me to not mention the Holocaust, in which 1.5 million Jewish children were killed in just a few years. When people say that the media is structured in a way that is anti-Semitic, we're saying that because it factually is. It's not a feeling or a fear or an idea. The media fixates on anything it can with the worst possible narratives about this tiny dot of a Jewish state without even telling you what's going on in the world or what the truth is. All right, more now from Her Royal Majesty.
It's very clear that Israel has no problem targeting civilians.
In the fog of war, there's so much that no one can know. There's no doubt that in every war, true civilians are killed. What do we know for a fact about what's going on in this conflict? Well, first of all, we know that Israel is the only country that takes a whole bunch of steps to try to limit civilian casualties. They drop leaflets, knock on doors, call people inside buildings, say in advance, we're going to bomb this area, please leave. The United States doesn't do this, Jordan doesn't do this, only Israel. We also know that one side in this conflict proudly seeks civilians to kill. That's Hamas, the Gaza side of this. And people throughout Gaza have celebrations when Jewish civilians inside Israel are killed. They don't even have to be Jewish, just any civilians, but especially if it's Jewish civilians. They hand out candy. They have fireworks. They celebrate civilian deaths. That is an obvious thing for any true journalist to bring up in response. And here's something else a journalist should bring up. Israel has said that it believes it has killed more than 13,000 terrorists. If that figure is accurate, then the proportion of civilians killed in this war would be extremely low as wars go. But we don't know. There's no way to confirm any of this stuff because the area is controlled by Hamas. Here's another thing that a journalist should follow up with. Your Royal Majesty, earlier this year, AFP reported that airstrikes attributed to Jordan killed civilians in Syria. Of course, Joy didn't mention that. And it's not just one. Here's another one from last year that accuses Jordanian forces of killing civilians in Syria. I'll post these in the newsletter so you can see these. Maybe if you want to talk about civilian deaths, you ask her to weigh in on those. The Queen also said this, which is related.
And when you say human shields as well, wherever Hamas leaders are, by default, there's going to be civilians around them.
The use of human shields is a tactical choice by Hamas. The use of human shields is also something that militaries study. It is a fact that Hamas sets up in civilian sites. This is how it operates. This is what it does. This is part of what makes it so hard to fight. And Hamas likes to maximize civilian casualties. Remember what I said about it worshiping death? Hamas likes that because it helps make anyone who fights it look so awful as though they're purposely killing civilians. What anyone moral should do is call on Hamas to stop instead of trying to pretend that it's somehow not happening or inevitable or downplaying it or anything. Queen Rania also said she wants to see this in an apparent reference to the United States.
Apply diplomatic pressure and stop using our veto to let Israel get away with things that other nations don't get away with.
Seriously? Okay, the reality is the exact opposite. Look, Iran is responsible for so much of what's happening. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, these are Hamas proxies. Hamas is waging war through all these groups. And guess what? Iran, nevertheless, took its appointment as chair of the UN Human Rights Council at the United Nations. How about Syria, which has waged war against its own people? Syria has not faced any of the repercussions that Israel is facing all over the world. Let's take a quick look at China. Here's a lead from the BBC. It begins with these words. China has been accused of committing crimes against humanity and possibly genocide against the Uyghur population and other mostly Muslim ethnic groups. Well, guess what? China still has its position on the UN Security Council, giving it veto power over UN security resolutions. The fact is, countries are given kid gloves compared to Israel, which is attacked in the global public square for everything that ever happens. So there is a double standard, but it's the exact opposite of the one that the Queen was talking about. And journalists should know this. Now, you might be wondering, well, hold on a second. Is the Queen really the right person to talk to about all this stuff? Aha, that's after this. We're starting to hear from sponsors, which is amazing. If a business or organization you're a part of wants to make it possible for this podcast to keep going, get in touch through the newsletter link in the show notes or through my website, joshlibs.com. All right, we're back. This is They Stand Corrected. I'm Josh Libs, and this is part one of a two-parter, All the Queen's Lies, based on a request from a listener. You might be thinking, well, this is Queen Rania we're talking about, and her husband has the power. She doesn't decide these things. Okay, why talk to her at all? Seriously, what's the point? Just because she, lives in extreme opulence? Why talk to her? Or you might think, well, her background is that she identifies as part of the Palestinian population, but what does that have to do with anything? Why hear from her? Obviously, she is speaking as a queen of a country. But let's just go down that road for a second. In her public stances, she is identified as someone who talks about women, the rights of women. In fact, Harvard had a celebration of International Women's Day with her a few years ago. And in their discussion, they have all this stuff about how she's so into women's empowerment. Okay, maybe ask her about this.
Rape as a weapon of war, most recently by Hamas against Israeli women during the October 7th attack and against hostages since. Atrocities confirmed by an NBC News investigation.
There are these unbelievably repugnant details of specific things that happen. Maybe talk to her about that. Ask her to weigh in. Or how about the little kids, including babies who were kidnapped by Hamas terrorists and are still being held? As a mom, someone who talks so much about women, hey, ask her how she feels about that. Nope. The Queen did say that the October 7th attacks were traumatic and devastating. She didn't say what they were, and Joy didn't ask her about those. And then the Queen said this.
Rightfully, after October 7th, the whole world stood up and condemned those actions.
I'm not big on using the term gaslighting because it's so overused these days, but it applies here because what she just said is not remotely what happened. There were celebrations around the world of the fact that Israel got attacked. Here's some sound of celebrations in Nablus in the West Bank from News 9. And there's this from the New York Post of celebrations for Hamas in New York. The Washington Post reported that across the United States and in Europe, authorities stepped up security at Jewish sites and areas where Jewish communities are.
The moves come after videos appeared to show people in several cities celebrating the surprise assault on Saturday.
Maybe the Queen only meant governments? All right, let's talk about that. The Washington Institute tracked what governments around the world said. Here's a little clip from the audio version of their report.
Representatives of approximately 100 countries have reacted to the war in varying ways. At least 44 nations have publicly expressed their unequivocal condemnation of Hamas and explicitly decried its tactics as terrorism. Others, including regional players such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Syria, and Iraq, have placed responsibility on Israel for the attacks.
What about Jordan? How did it respond? Well, according to the Washington Institute, the first statement came from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Expatriate Affairs that did not condemn the attacks. It stressed the need to stop dangerous escalation. Queen Rania's husband, King Abdullah, wrote an op-ed that was published by the Washington Post in November. The vast majority of it is slamming Israel, but he does say on October 7th, Israel was wounded and deeply traumatized by the killings of more than 1,000 Israelis, including women and children, by Hamas. So that is in there. In February, he met with President Biden and made remarks that included a lot of very heavy criticisms of Israel. It did include this.
All attacks against innocent civilians, women and children, including those of October 7th, cannot be accepted by any Muslim, as I had previously stressed. We must make sure the horrors of the past few months since October 7th are never repeated nor accepted by any human being.
But long of the short here, no, the whole world did not stand up right after October 7th and condemn those actions. Also, his report from an Israeli news channel, Kan 11, quote, Jordan has already managed to include the October 7th attack in one of the 10th grade textbooks in civics and to present it as a legitimate and justified action. Maybe that's the kind of thing you ask the Queen about, especially given what happened to women, right? If that's her thing. Of course, that would require actually valuing the lives of Jewish women. But how about this? Maybe talk to her about the lives of Jordanian women. After all, her official website from the Jordanian government says that in Jordan, she is committed to empowering women and their communities and also improving child and family protection services. Okay. Talk to her about what's going on with women in Jordan. After all, women's rights are super important to Joy. She talks about them a lot.
These anti-abortion extremists won't even need Congress to end access to abortion. They also plan to use ways government agencies could reduce the procedure. That's the 2024 national plan. In the meantime, Republican-controlled states are looking for new ways to punish women and anyone who helps them. Kansas won the week. They beat back this draconian attempt to rewrite the state constitution to take away women's liberty, women's freedoms.
How is Jordan doing on that front? After all, you care about women's rights and freedoms, and you've got the Queen right there. How are the more than 5.5 million women in Jordan doing in terms of their rights and freedoms? That would be a better use of your audience's time than just giving the Queen yet another open mic to lie all she wants. A journalist should do some basic research. For example, a bunch of reports say that in general, most abortions are still illegal in Jordan and that women can be imprisoned. Also, every year, the U.S. State Department puts out human rights reports about different countries. Here are just a few of the many, many points in the human rights report. Spousal rape is not illegal. Here's another line. The government did not effectively enforce the law against rape. That's other forms of rape because spousal rape is allowed. Gender-based violence was prevalent. How about this? According to local and international NGOs, authorities routinely engaged in involuntary protective detention of women, a type of informal detention without trial, to deal with cases ranging from sex outside of marriage to absence from home to being the victim of sexual violence, all of which could put women at risk of so-called honor crimes. Now, if you don't know what honor crimes are, here is a quick description from DW. It's the Germany-based network Deutsche Welle.
A so-called honor killing is the murder of a person accused of bringing shame upon his or her family. For women, this can be as trivial as talking to a male who is not her blood relative, but it could also mean marrying someone her family does not approve of, or even being raped.
Now, apparently, Jordan has managed to get some kind of law in place to try to limit honor killings, but groups that watch this stuff say that those laws are nowhere near effectively enforced. There's also a survey that the BBC reported on a few years ago in which 21% of people in Jordan said they believe honor killings are acceptable. Meanwhile, here's another line from the State Department Human Rights Report. Listen to this. Although the law no longer absolved rapists who married the survivors of their assaults, observers noted the customary belief persisted that if a woman married her rapist, her family members would not need to kill her to preserve the family's honor. Because so many crimes go unreported, we don't know the total number of honor killings and other forms of honor crimes. There was a report several years ago from this thing called Context, which is part of the Thomson Reuters Foundation. They said that Jordan had the highest rate of honor killings in the world. And there's a report from New Arab last year that the numbers of honor killings in Jordan went up in 2022. Either way, it is factually a huge problem. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Joy does care about this, absolutely. And so does Queen Rania. Here's a quote from her all the way back in 2003. So we're talking 21 years ago. She said, quote, "It really does baffle me, and Jordan is very, very committed to really finding a solution and ending these crimes against women." Great. Talk about it. Ask her, what more can be done? More than 2 decades have gone by. This is still a horrific problem. What's happening? See, the refusal to even bring this stuff up is so significant for what it says about the media and much of the progressive movement in America. Also, a crucial journalistic rule that you should know about right after this. I'm going on the road. I've been hearing from groups wanting to bring me in for talks and events on these topics. As you may know, I speak at all sorts of companies, organizations, schools. I've also spoken at the UN, Congress, the Oxford Student Union. You can see a bunch of videos and get in touch through the newsletter linked in the show notes or at my website, joshlebs.com. How great would it be to come out and meet as many of you as possible in person? It's possible that you're wondering, was there some sort of promise made that the Queen would not be asked about any of these topics? Let's just make this clear. In journalism, you don't do that. Ever. You do not promise a governmental official, a leader, that you won't bring up such crucial topics. That would be the opposite of journalism, if anyone makes any kind of deal like that. But sadly, the way a lot of media is shaping up these days, guests sometimes know that they don't even need a promise because they will probably be able to get away with something like this. Here's the deal. What so much of the media does, and what so much of the progressive movement does, is when it comes to this one issue, they set aside all their other beliefs. Concerns about democracy, concerns about freedom, concerns about women's rights, all of these things suddenly are off the table if it's an opportunity to slam Israel. You know, there are people in the media, including on MSNBC, who have talked about the idea of radicalization due to the big lie of the right, the idea of the election being stolen. That's the big lie of the right. The big lie of the left is about big bad Israel being this uniquely evil entity in the world. And this side of the media is every bit as committed to radicalizing people and appealing to radicalized people. And what if I told you that everything I've shared with you here is not even the worst of this interview? Because on top of everything else, this interview prevented you from having the chance to learn what's really going on in the Middle East and in a bigger picture around the world, what this war really is. It is not a binary war between Israel and Hamas. What's at stake is so much bigger, with major players in the region, including and especially Jordan. That'll be next week's episode. Meanwhile, you might want to know, what can I do about this? Well, come join my newsletter. You'll find the link in the show notes. There, I post text that you can send to any news agency when you see or hear the media misrepresenting this. Also, Queen Rania is on a tour. She's doing all these events and apparently other media that I have not yet seen. Contact them and say to them, look, this is her record of lying. Why are you platforming her? For more lies? You'll find all that and more in the newsletter, and it's where you can support. I am so appreciative to everybody joining this. This podcast just started, and we're already forming a community, so thank you, thank you. Be here next week when I will give you part 2 of all the Queen's lies. Until then. I'm so grateful to Nextiva for the support. These days, businesses have so many different ways they stay in touch with customers. Your business needs to pull all those interactions together into one place and get real-time insights from every conversation, turning them into results you can measure. That's where Nextiva comes in with its AI-powered platform. Check it out, nextiva.com.